Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. This episode is sponsored by Annapolis Pediatrics. For more than 70 years, Annapolis Pediatrics has provided exceptional healthcare to infants, children, adolescents, and young adults in Annapolis and the surrounding communities. They have over 30 physicians and nurse practitioners to serve your family, and now in 6 locations: Annapolis, Crofton, Edgewater, Severna Park, Kent Island, and Pasadena. Learn more about Annapolis Pediatrics and find helpful parenting resources, videos, and more at AnnapolisPediatrics.com. So today we're talking about father-daughter relationships, and joining us is relationship expert and award-winning author and virtual and live guest speaker, Heather Dugan. Thank you so much, Heather, for joining me today.
It's great to see you again, Janet. Looking forward to this.
So to our viewers, same as usual, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll get to those as we can. Heather, let's jump into this. So Father's Day is right around the corner. It's coming up this weekend. Let's start at the beginning. What role do fathers play in daughters' lives, and why is that important?
Well, I mean, they are, of course, the first male that she will come in contact with, assuming that the father is part of her life. So there's an awful lot of absorption going on through all of that contact. You know, I think about if you land in another country and you do not speak the language, you are gathering all your information about how people interact and the dialogue from either the media or the people you're in contact with. So the dad is kind of that mark on what a man is for the beginning part of her life, particularly. And, you know, they have a lot to do with that early development. And again, if they are not there, that doesn't mean that the impact isn't there. The impact of a dad figure, whether he's in her life or not, there's certain qualities that tend to be imparted from the male parent that are not necessarily coming from the mom. So all of those things kind of pull together to really make it's both parents are so important. And I think they're beginning to understand more and more with some of the research that the significant ways that dads can impact at particular times in a girl's life. But, you know, the dads are really a source of kind of building your confidence and resilience. And both parents, of course, that is so important, the unconditional love. You know, that's what follows us the rest of our lives, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about sort of the things that, what is the difference between moms and dads and how they really do impact your kids? So what, as sort of a relationship expert, what are you seeing at the role of the mom versus the role of the dad, and sort of how that is nuanced?
Sure. Well, you know, the mom is traditionally, and all of this, these are generalities grabbed from, you know, the details gathered in studies. So it's kind of the patterns that are seen in a lot of the research, but moms tend to be more nurturing and protective. They're the ones that will, you know, don't forget your helmet, you know, that kind of thing, right? Or, you know, you need a sweater because I'm cold. And the dad, on the other hand, is the one that generally, traditionally, might introduce more of the elements of risk-taking and the more physical aspects of being a human being. Moms tend to be more involved and aware of the day-to-day things. And sometimes that can make dads feel a little separated from their children. And, you know, I think there's been some big swings in the past few years where dads are really, and COVID certainly impacted this as well, where dads are really trying to get or desire to be more involved in the day-to-day details. But, you know, traditionally that has fallen more on the mom in the first place. So they sometimes tend to have that bigger picture of what's going on in a child's life. And dad kind of sometimes is there for the big events, or the, you know, as much, sometimes more than the day-to-day pieces and parts that make up, you know, the weekdays of our lives.
Right. Yeah, I think your comment about COVID is a really interesting one, because this has been in the conversation for a long time. Mothers saying, hey, this is our role. We've been stuck here for a while. This needs to be more dynamic. We need to see dads involved in a different way. And that's, of course, not to say that all dads are like that. But I think COVID did really push us at least to have this discussion
Mhm.
be in the forefront, because we all were mixed in together and it forced relationships in a way that it maybe hadn't before. And so it will be interesting to see what sort of changes stick and what direction we head in as American culture and raising children
Right.
over time. And of course, I'm sure that there's also generational differences,
Sure.
that we don't want to make the same mistakes as our parents did, and so we're so worried about that we end up making new mistakes as parents.
Right. We swing
um,
totally the other direction. That's
right.
how it always
So
goes, right?
it will be
Mhm.
really interesting to see what happens in the future.
Mhm.
So you specifically had brought up the point of fathers and daughters and how it's a really unique relationship. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that relationship, and how it's maybe different from a father-son relationship. And what
Mhm.
is it about those dynamics that create different impacts?
Sure. And there's some interesting research I ran across a couple weeks ago that kind of fascinated me. Some of that gender, and we can call it bias or whatever, but is there so early. I know you have younger children. They say the research is showing as young as ages, 1 or 2, dads respond differently, interact differently with their daughters as opposed with their sons.
Hmm.
With the sons, it tends to be more achievement, more, better, those kinds of words, right?
Mhm.
And with the daughters, maybe a little more analytical and also kind of brings in more of the sad feelings, more emotive type stuff.
Mhm.
So, they tend to be more present, or what would I say, more kind of more interactive with their daughters than with their sons, and tend to bring in more physical play with sons than with daughters.
Hmm.
Now, this sounds, very much like what you might expect on some of that. Just I'm one of 4 daughters in my birth family, so my only perspective was from the girl side, and then
Mhm.
becoming a mother to 2 sons and a daughter. Totally different dynamics. And so, I kind of was absorbing all the way through and telling, my sons, I haven't done this before. I don't know boys, but that's
Right.
where, the dad comes in. Right. Right.
Mhm.
And that's a good thing. And then the really interesting thing too, is that, dads really can begin to develop in new ways when they have these young daughters and sons, and daughters can open up a whole kind of different area of emotion
Hmm.
than they've really typically tapped into before.
Mhm. Interesting. So,
Mhm.
I mean, as always, we're human, and so we're constantly learning and growing, even as adults. And so, thinking about how relationships, are a two-way street, and we're learning and
Mhm.
growing from each other. So, the dads are teaching the daughters, but then also vice
Yeah.
versa. Um, and it's so interesting to hear this research and then reflect upon it and be like, okay, this is what we're finding or what we have found. What does that mean looking forward? Are we comfortable with this?
Mhm.
Do we want to change this? What does it mean
Yes.
for, our individual families and our individual relationships?
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting thing to think about, is are we comfortable um, with living some of these stereotypes, and
Right.
is that needle moving? And it sounds
I,
like it
and
is.
I think it is. And there's some other, another study pointed out how daughters that had really more involved, like they were involved in their academic and their sports and that kind of thing, they tended to be gravitating more towards uh, positions that men traditionally held. And they
Hmm.
were more, they developed that kind of some of those stronger personality qualities that are needed to succeed possibly in, academics or business as a result of what they were taking in from their father. And this can be, doing projects together. It's just any kind of side by side consistent activity shared like that. And then, that whole, the dynamics, this is another thing that you will say, oh yes, of course, except you haven't quite been through it yet, but you anticipate, I'm sure. But as women grow, and sons too, but there's a lot of waning and back, a lot of back and forth in terms of what parent they're closer to, depending on the age, the environment, the individual dynamics in the situation. So, the important thing I think for dads particularly to keep in mind, sometimes it feels like they're not as much a part of things,
Mhm.
but they are at a level, and it'll come and it'll get stronger and weaker maybe at different points in life. But if both parents are available to be there, that's going to give your kid the best support and experience, whether you're in the same home or not.
Right. Right.
Having access like that is going to help them to strengthen the best qualities that they have to be ready to go in this world.
That's a
Um,
really good reminder because you're right. It's so hard when there's a child that's like, I don't want to spend time with you. I like mom
yes,
better or I like dad better. As a parent, it's like, oh no, what am I doing wrong? But to know, just
right.
sort of lean in and say, this is natural child development. It's
Yeah.
okay. What's important is that I'm here, I'm present. And when you need me, I will be here no matter what. I think that's a really
Mhm.
important reminder because it's hard to,
Parents get their feelings hurt.
yeah.
I've talked to other parents who have shared that with me. It can hurt their feelings in a way that impacts their ability to parent going forward.
Hmm.
And that's really unfortunate because,
Mhm.
you don't want to say disrespectful behaviors. Okay, I'm a doormat, but
Right.
you want to show, I see you. I care about you. I want to understand you, and just be available for that intimacy. The books I write, they all get into the connection thing, and connection is about feeling seen, feeling understood, and that's more than just being in the same room. That
Right.
means there's an openness there, and there's an ability to notice changes and moods maybe that your child is going through.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they won't always want to talk about them. There's a lot of
Right.
things we don't even have the words for, but and some kids, they'll spill it all out. They're extroverted as anything. Other kids, it's got to sit and boil and kind of come into its own little thing in their mind before they're willing to speak the words.
Right.
But that consistency,
Mhm.
always being there is such an important thing,
Yeah.
regardless of what they say to you. Or don't say to you when they're giving you the
Right.
silent treatment.
Right. Heather, something you said really struck me, and I feel like we went by it too fast. So I want to
Oh,
rewind for a moment.
sure.
And you had said that the research has shown that um, kids, daughters particularly, who have these stronger relationships with their fathers, and whatever that relationship looks like, but it's a positive one where maybe they have a shared activity or whatever, but they have this relationship, that those daughters typically then grow up to be more confident and more successful, and then maybe even find themselves more successful in the traditionally male sort of
Yes.
career paths. And that is really interesting research. So I
Yeah.
guess with that, thinking about what do these childhood relationships then mean later in life, it what else are you seeing in the research there? But that's wild.
It is. But yeah, I'm looking at some of the more details here. But, what it all comes down to is encouraging that self-reliance and the assertiveness.
Okay.
So, that's always a kind of a bugaboo for women. I mean, it has been traditionally.
Right.
And so when they get that extra boost, think of parents as buffers and boosters. Sometimes you're just a buffer, you're off to the side, but you are still protecting. And
Right.
sometimes you're in there with both arms, pushing them up and helping them move forward. But that gives them what they need sometimes, that extra something to
Uh-huh.
go on into those higher paying, more demanding positions in life, to take on risk. That's a risk-taking behavior, which is typically more from the male side of the parenting, the
Oh,
risk-taking. Now,
right.
and as we
Right.
talk about roles evolving, I think that there are more women modeling that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
the kids are taking in all aspects of what it means to be a man or a woman from their parents. So
Hmm.
we're showing them the way in that way. Another really interesting study talks about when daughters have a less than wonderful relationship with their dad, when they don't feel that intimate connection with them,
Hmm.
it's shown to leave them with a lower level of cortisol,
Hmm.
which is a hormone we need for stressful situations. It impacts every part of our body practically. But those that did not have a good relationship with their father, or even ongoing, they did some studies. It was undergraduate women, and they found that those with the lower with the less of a wonderful relationship had low cortisol levels, and that made them overly sensitive
Hmm.
and to be overly reactive with stress, which then went into the relationships that they had. They had more rejections reported and unpredictability, felt coerced. They got into bad relationships
Hmm.
because they did not have a good relationship with their dad,
Right.
which is something you hear about, but they've seen scientifically kind of what that looks like in the body.
Right. That's so interesting that there's a very physical response to that as well.
Right.
And I think
Right.
that's also good to think about that, having that positive relationship with your father can do really positive things
Right.
for adult women, but then vice versa, a negative relationship can then do really negative things as well. So that's good to know when thinking about raising children, how
Right.
important that relationship is. And at the very least, it needs to be neutral. So you're just not doing damage.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah.
fascinating research, though. Um, Thinking then about fathers who are currently actively raising children now, and so it's very clear that it is good to establish a positive relationship. What are the most important things that fathers can do to make a positive impact or to have a positive relationship?
Sure. And consistency first, through all the ups and downs, the backs and forth, just making yourself a constant presence.
Okay.
Whether, they don't want to talk to you, great. You're reading the paper in the same room or whatever, that's okay. You need to go pick up supplies for school. I'll drive you.
Mhm.
Just being part of their life. And then, encouraging, and this comes from both parents actually, but just really spot when you see them do something good, when you spot a quality, quantify it, call it something, instead of saying, oh, you did that well. Be specific about what you see, the skills that they're exercising,
Mm.
because those things get inputted. I remember specific things my dad said to me as a young girl, and those became part of who I knew myself to be. How
Mhm.
powerful is that? I
Mhm.
mean, and my dad's been gone for, he died young, but it's been way over 20 years,
Mm.
but it's still in my how I talk to myself, how I think about myself.
Right.
And I'm trying to think, there's some other, I think just another point that was brought up a couple times that I think is not here, but the beauty remarks, that kind of thing. Dads sometimes are really confused about where to go with that. Do I not say she's pretty? I mean, it's my little girl.
Right.
And I think you want to look at the bigger picture. Of course, there's nothing wrong with saying, oh, you look great in that dress. That's really the girl, she's picked out this dress and
Right.
she feels really special in it. But make sure that's not where the focus always is.
Mhm.
Physicality, the looks, be sure that, that's this much if you're going to do it, and keep it specific on, you want to be praising the bigger things they're doing, the qualities they're developing, the way they're so kind to their younger brother, the
Right.
way that they are looking for ways to help mom, the way that they came up with a great solution in the family game you were playing. They had an
Right.
answer that was very creative. Finding those things and pointing them out are really important.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Um, we are on the cusp of Father's Day.
Mm,
I'd like to talk just briefly about celebrating dads and
yeah.
how can we celebrate dads in a way that's meaningful and to thank them for their role in our family. What do you suggest to make a meaningful impact?
Yes. A lot will depend on the age of the children. I don't, I remember
Well,
Mother's
and
Days
adults
where,
too, like.
right, exactly how adults do it. You accept and you're thrilled with whatever came out of their creative brain, right? But if say you're an adult daughter, it's something I used to love to do with a Father's Day golf outing, public
Mm.
course, took a brown bag lunch. The big thing was nobody was a great golfer, but it was the time shared.
Mhm.
We walked from tee to tee and we talked. And, I think things like that, bike rides, picnics, anything, anything that allows dad to enjoy something that he enjoys. It's great if the family enjoys it together, but think about your dad specifically. What are his interests? Is he a guy that likes to sit and fish by the lake, or is he a guy that would love to hop on a bike and go explore something new?
Mhm.
And then if, the specific, I mean, I can't say that enough. If you're an adult daughter and you're getting in touch with your dad and it's Father's Day related, or any time you want to let him know how meaningful he is to you, be specific about the things you remember and how those played out in your life. Do you remember that time when we did this? I always think of that when we all want to know that what we're doing matters, that the relationships matter, that there's an impact. I mean, that's what makes our hearts beat, what just makes life joyful. So that is, the time shared is a big gift, but the words you use in that time also can just be so incredibly meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point, that it's about the experience, and the experiences are really what we remember most. So that
Mhm.
can often be the greatest gift, is to just spend time and do something fun and do something that they love.
Yeah.
Um, so Father's Day can be really complicated for a lot of people. For people who have lost their dads or don't have a positive
Right.
relationship with their dads, it can be a really heavy time. But
Right.
then thinking about the topic that we're touching on today, just those father-daughter relationships, and looking at the research, clearly fathers can make a big positive impact in adult
Yes.
women's lives. So then what does that mean for the families where the dad isn't present for a variety of reasons, whether
Right.
it's a family that is chosen to not have a dad in the picture, or it just didn't work out, or it's a situation
Mhm.
where there are two moms and it's a
Yeah.
loving, healthy family. It just doesn't have a dad. What does that mean
Mhm.
for kids, and how they can grow up, and how can those families support their children and make sure that they're getting what they need?
Sure. Well, I think if you look at what is kind of been traditional, what has traditionally been supplied by the father figure, those might be gaps, is
Mhm.
what you want to consider, I think, as you look forward. Through adolescence, a good supportive dad relationship has measurable impact in terms of lessening the likelihood of depression, body image issues, self-esteem, a lot of those things that women some will grapple with for years to come if they don't kind of set that foundation to begin with. And even if they do, it can get wobbly. So I think being aware that that could be kind of a hole in the wall, the barrier that needs to be kind of watched. You can, as a parent or as an adult woman yourself, that might be something you want to look back on. If I have these feelings, I'm a big recommender of therapy. If it takes therapy to go in and dig and find out what the launch point is for
Mhm.
feelings that are kind of preventing you from living your best life, it's important to find that, because that is something that can be fixed.
Mhm.
The keys are in your hand. You just have to be willing to face it and take the steps. But if you're a parent and you're concerned that it hasn't been the traditional family experience, that is not the traditional experience anymore for
Mhm.
most families.
Yeah.
Look at how, the messages your daughter is getting. Are there some positive role models of both genders, of all kind, in her life, different people that can speak the right encouraging messages to her and help her. It's all about giving them access to what is inside them so they can grow it well.
Mhm.
So you want to spotlight the right things. You don't want to magnify the flaws, but flaws are there. It's okay to recognize them, but they don't define who we are either. So,
Mhm.
I think you could, if you're aware of where the gaps might be, you
Mhm.
can actively work to kind of fill them in better ways.
Mhm. Yeah, so anyone can take on those roles of making
Mhm.
sure, one, that they're present, two, they're consistent, the really important ones, but then do expose your daughters to risk taking, even if you're
Yes.
hesitant to do so. Maybe you're a single
Yeah.
mom and you're like, I can't handle that. Have a role model who can expose her to that and make sure that she has an assertive, strong role
Yes.
model that she can be like, oh yeah, I can do that too.
That's reminding me when I was going through my divorce, and thankfully my kid's dad is part of their lives. That's all good. But I kind of took on some of that risk sharing with my kids, started taking them on these big hiking trips. And, that was out of my immediate comfort zone. I wanted to do it. But I hadn't done mountain hiking before, up and down 14ers in Colorado and all that. And I will never forget that first trail, going down into this deep, deep canyon with all my kids in front of me thinking, I am the best mom, or we're going to be on, the headline on the news tonight because we've got our backpacks and our water. And I'm going, oh my gosh, is this great? Or did I just totally make a huge mistake? But it was the most bonding experience. And we did learn by taking some of those risks through our, travel time together, our adventures, learning to tap into some really important tools within ourselves. So it can be a gift for the mom that's trying to help add that element to their child's life too.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, bringing up that story is a good point, that risk taking can come in a lot of different forms. And it just needs to be pushing your children's comfort zone in a space where they're learning and growing in a new way. And whether that be traveling or hiking or the great outdoors or whatever, there's so many different ways to approach that, or even like climbing a tree or learning a new language as a family. I can see so many different types of risk taking that you can expose kids to in a sort of fun, healthy way.
Playing a musical instrument can feel like a risk to a child that's not used to getting up and performing in front of people or something, if that's part of the picture. So, it's all about really just, we don't have everything we need to solve the situation immediately, but to begin to trust yourself that you can find it within yourself, that you can find resources around you to deal with the things that life's going to bring your way. So much is, it's not about what you exit childhood with in your backpack, all that you've gathered together. It's about knowing that you can get access to those things you're going to need. And so that makes for a less anxious person.
Right.
And a more open person, and a person that's really available to exciting new opportunities. And they're the change makers. These are the people that can go out and do great new things that, haven't necessarily been thought of yet. But, to nurture that kind of creativity, you have to get comfortable with taking risk. You have to be ready to make a mistake.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Heather Dugan, for joining us today. And thank you to all of our viewers and listeners as well, and to our sponsor, Annapolis Pediatrics. And I also want to say a happy early Father's Day to all the dads who are celebrating out there. Make sure that you do visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in both video and podcast format. And make sure that you check it out, because you can also find a link to Heather to get in touch with her, and some fun resources there as well. I'm Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.